In 1954, as the shadows of communism loomed over Southeast Asia, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization emerged, a desperate attempt to halt the spread of an ideology that threatened to engulf nations. Modeled after NATO, SEATO was a coalition of nations, united by fear and a shared commitment to containment. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. As Vietnam became the battleground, SEATO's promises of security crumbled. The echoes of war rang out, and alliances strained under the weight of conflict. What was meant to be a shield against communism turned into a harbinger of chaos. The question remains, how did this alliance, forged in the fires of fear, lead to one of the most devastating conflicts in history? The roots of the Vietnam War run deep, and the story is far from over. In 1954, a shadow loomed over Southeast Asia as the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO, was born. With only the Philippines and Thailand representing the region, the rest were Western powers, drawn by strategic interests rather than genuine alliance. SEATO aimed to replicate NATO's success, a bulwark against the creeping tide of communism. But it faltered, no unified command, and a reluctance of member states to commit forces. The Soviet Union and China watched with growing alarm, perceiving SEATO as purposely antagonistic and of great strategic concern. Ironically, the formation of SEATO as an anti-communist bulwark only served to fuel their resolve, intensifying the expansion and support for communist factions across Southeast Asia. The stage was set for conflict, a dark prelude to the chaos that would engulf the region. Bao Dai, Vietnam's last emperor, was more than a ruler. He was a relic of a dying age. His reign unfolded amidst the chaos of colonialism and war. During World War II, he made a perilous pact with the Japanese, a desperate bid for survival in a land ravaged by conflict. As the cries for freedom grew louder, he briefly aligned with Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh, hoping to navigate the storm of independence. But by 1949, feeling the tides shift against him, he fled in exile to Hong Kong and France. The French, in their desperation, summoned him back as a puppet, but his reign was fleeting. In 1954, in what many consider a rigged election, Ngo Dinh Diem's controversial rise marked the end of centuries of imperial rule. As the CIA intensified its activities in the country, the seeds of war were sown. In mid-1954, as the Geneva Peace Conference unfolded, and France faced devastating losses to the Viet Minh, Vietnam's Prime Minister, Bu Loc stepped down. This pivotal moment opened the door for Ngo Dinh Diem, a figure deemed essential by both France and the United States for a new Vietnam. After 4 years in exile across France and America, Diem returned, a devout Catholic in a predominantly Buddhist nation. His arrival sparked a mix of hope and fear. His appeal to the West was clear. He was a fervent anti-communist, fluent in English, and a Roman Catholic. Amid increasing influence of CIA operations and his own fanaticism, Diem's rule would soon unleash a tumultuous era, igniting a conflict that would engulf Vietnam for decades. In June 1954, amidst the chaos of Vietnam's looming partition as part of the Geneva Accords, a group of U.S. servicemen from the 315th Air Division found themselves in an unexpected nightmare. On an unauthorized beach day from their base at Tehran Airfield at Da Nang, 5 airmen were captured by Viet Minh forces, turning leisure into a harrowing 78-day ordeal. The men were held by the Viet Minh 60 miles south of the base in an area surrounded by mines and bamboo stakes, and their fate hung in the balance, a pawn in the geopolitical chess game underway in Vietnam. By late August, they were released in a prisoner exchange, and the incident marked one of the first direct interactions between U.S. military personnel and communist forces in Vietnam. This incident foreshadowed America's deepening involvement in Southeast Asia. In July 1954, the Geneva Accords were signed in Paris. A ceasefire was declared, granting independence to Vietnam and dividing it at the 17th parallel into North Vietnam and the state of Vietnam, or South Vietnam. A demilitarized zone, just 6 miles wide, was established to separate them. Viet Minh soldiers retreated north, while French-aligned forces moved south, and free movement of people was allowed between the two for 300 days. The Accords division was temporary, a fragile line drawn in the sand, and elections were slated to unite the country, but pushed to a date in July 1956. The specter of Ho Chi Minh loomed large, with Eisenhower himself noting that 80% of the population would have voted for him if the elections were held in 1954. The United States and South Vietnam never signed the Accords. Colonel Edward Lansdale and a dozen operatives in the newly established Saigon military mission began their efforts in Vietnam in August 1954. The psychological and political warfare mission included operations to distribute leaflets warning of the fate of the Vietnamese under the Viet Minh and hiring astrologers to make dire predictions of disaster in the north and peace in the south. With 300 days of travel being allowed under the Geneva Accords, the team worked to encourage immigration from the north to the south and discourage immigration from the south to the north. Covert operations also got underway, contaminating the oil supply in North Vietnam to ruin the motors of Hanoi buses, making daily life difficult for the population. The team also began training potential guerrillas and smuggling arms and other equipment to paramilitary anti-communist groups in the north. In 1954, President Eisenhower and the National Security Council made a fateful decision. They resolved to provide military training to South Vietnam, but only through the French, a reluctant partnership that masked deeper tensions. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff hesitated, sensing the chaos in South Vietnam, believing that training an army in such turmoil was a fool's errand. Yet, this decision ignited a chain reaction that would eventually spiral into a conflict of unimaginable scale. Historians argue that this decision set in motion a series of events that would prove irreversible, sealing the fate of a nation and its people. On August 17, 1954, the USS Menard sailed from Haiphong in the north, carrying 1,924 refugees for the three-day trip to Saigon, the first of many U.S. and French Navy vessels to transport refugees from north to south under the new operation called Passage to Freedom. For the next 300 days of free movement allowed under the Geneva Agreement, an estimated 600,000 to 1 million Vietnamese would flee south, with about 75% of them being Catholics seeking refuge from the looming specter of communism. Between 14,000 and 45,000 civilians and approximately 100,000 Viet Minh fighters moved in the opposite direction from south to north. In South Vietnam, the Viet Minh left behind 8,000 to 10,000 covert civilian and military personnel. In mid-September 1954, Prime Minister Ngo Dinh Diem faced the first major crisis of his new government in South Vietnam. He dismissed Army Chief of Staff, General Nguyen Van Hinh, and ordered him to leave the country. General Hinh defiantly refused, and just days later surrounded the presidential palace with tanks. The bold move sent shockwaves through the government, with 9 out of Diem's 15 cabinet members resigning. Colonel Edward Lansdale of the CIA's Saigon military mission attempted to buy support for Diem from influential leaders of the Hoa, Hao, and Cao Dai religious sections. Diem finally managed to stabilize the situation by appointing 4 Hoa Hao and 2 Cao Dai leaders to his cabinet. The newly created South Vietnam was already unstable at best. October 9, 1954, a day that marked the end of an era in French Indochina. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Viet Minh soldiers marched into Hanoi, their presence a harbinger of change. The French military garrison, once a symbol of colonial power, lowered its flag for the last time, withdrawing from the city. A few days later, Ho Chi Minh, the enigmatic leader of the Viet Minh, entered the city without fanfare and took up the reins of government in North Vietnam. The beginning of the struggle for Vietnam's soul was far from over. What lay ahead would plunge the nation into chaos, forever altering the course of history. In October 1954, just 3 days after he took control of government in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh met with French officials. With a calm demeanor, Ho said he hoped France would retain a cultural and economic presence in North Vietnam. He also advised he envisioned a slow march towards socialism, and reassured the Frenchmen that Vietnam would pursue independent policies not dictated by the communist governments of China or the Soviet Union. But Ho also gave a stark warning. Following the meeting, French official Saulnier cautioned his government that Ho Chi Minh and the North would fiercely resist any attempt to split Vietnam into two. History was about to take a dark turn. In late October 1954, the U.S. Department of State ordered the Military Assistance Advisory Group in Saigon to begin a program to train as many Vietnamese forces as necessary for internal security. This wasn't just a routine mission, it was a pivotal moment. President Eisenhower penned a letter to Prime Minister Ngo Dinh Diem, promising U.S. support if he met certain standards of performance in democratic reforms. Diem agreed to the terms, and this letter marked the beginning of a deep and complex relationship, one that would entangle the U.S. in the turbulent fate of South Vietnam. History would reveal Diem failed to follow through on reforms, eventually causing havoc for his government and the country. In late October 1954, South Vietnam teetered on the brink of chaos. Just a month after a failed coup, Prime Minister Ngo Dinh Diem again faced another threat. Army Chief of Staff Nguyen Van Hinh again plotted to storm the presidential palace, a move that could shatter Diem's fragile grip on power. But the CIA's Saigon military mission, ever watchful, caught wind of the conspiracy. Colonel Lansdale intervened, persuading Hinh's key military allies, Colonels Lê Quang Tung and Chun Von Dong, that an official trip to the Philippines was necessary. With his two main coup supporters absent, General Hin was forced to abandon his plans. The coup was thwarted, but the shadows of betrayal loomed large and ever present in South Vietnam. On November 8, 1954, General Lawton Collins stepped onto Vietnamese soil in Saigon. As special representative of the United States under Eisenhower, he brought a heavy carrot and stick combination with him. Collins declared Diem the legal government in Vietnam and promised $100 million in aid. But the South Vietnamese army would only receive the aid if they continued to support Ngo Dinh Diem. Just days later, U.S. Ambassador Donald Heath departed for America, leaving Collins as the highest-ranking U.S. official in Vietnam. The State Department lambasted Heath for being too accommodating to the French and too critical of Prime Minister Diem. At this point, U.S. policy was determined to go all in on the current leadership in Saigon. On November 29, 1954, General Nguyen Van Hinh left Vietnam for exile in Paris, and his coup co-conspirators quickly followed, marking a pivotal moment in the country's turbulent history. Hin, a key figure in the fading French regime, was deeply critical of Ngo Dinh Diem's rise as prime minister. After a failed coup attempt in September and another one that never materialized in October, Hin faced a stark reality. The U.S. pledged to cut off monetary aid to the South Vietnamese army unless they backed Diem. Under pressure from Vietnam's last emperor, Bao Dai, Hin reluctantly chose exile. This decision significantly weakened the opposition to Diem, allowing him to consolidate power and shape the future of South Vietnam. In early December 1954, Ho Chi Minh secured a pivotal aid agreement with China and the Soviet Union. This deal provided essential equipment and technical assistance to rebuild North Vietnam's war-torn infrastructure. With Russian and Chinese advisors stepping in, the French influence waned, allowing Ho Chi Minh to shift his focus from mere survival to nation-building. China, fresh from its own revolution, contributed advisors and vital resources like rice, while the Soviets supplied crucial military and technical equipment, wary of Western encroachment in Southeast Asia. This aid was not just about recovery. It laid the groundwork for the protracted conflict that would engulf the region for years to come. After only a month in Vietnam, General Lawton Collins quickly came to agree with former Ambassador Donald Heath's low opinion of Prime Minister Diem's leadership. In mid-December 1954, Collins suggested that the U.S. give thought to possible alternatives if the Diem government did not make progress, and, if no acceptable alternative to Ngo Dinh Diem could be found, the U.S. should consider withdrawing from Vietnam. U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles rebuked Collins for his suggestion that an alternative to Diem be sought. Dulles contended that under the present circumstances, the U.S. had no choice but to continue support of Diem. This dissension between U.S. personnel dealing with the reality on the ground in Vietnam and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., was already becoming an early problem in America's deepening involvement in Southeast Asia.